State Senator Dan Wolf breaks down the state budget process, and we've got an update on that Barnstable bear on this episode of Barnstable Today. It's Wednesday, May 30th, 2012. I'm Sarah Colvin. As I mentioned, we do have an update on the Barnstable bear for you today. Of course, that bear had been first spotted early Sunday morning over on Route 6A, spotted several places in West Barnstable, but according to reports from Yarmouth's animal control officer I got today, the bear was spotted on Route 6A in Yarmouth this morning. Calls came in around 6:30 a.m. from folks who had seen the animal near Homer's Dock Road and Grays Beach, later near the Dennis town line. Unconfirmed sightings have been reported in the town of Dennis as well. And again, just a reminder, if you do see the bear, give local officials a call. Well, just as the town of Barnstable is working on its spending plan for fiscal 2013, so is the state. Cape and Island State Senator Dan Wolf is now in the midst of his second budget process on Beacon Hill. He commented on the process earlier this week.
Still a very tough environment from a budget standpoint because the economy still really hasn't recovered. So I have yet to see, this is only my second budget since I became state senator, I've yet to see sort of an unconstrained budget process where there are funds that are really adequate to fund both, the education that's so important from a state level, environmental protection, investments in our economy as represented both by investment in infrastructure and also support of what we've talked about in the past, workforce training, workforce development, really supporting the workers out there, and human and social service programs. So, it is sort of it's a real struggle because just when you think you have your priorities straight, you realize, oh my God, it's just, here's another priority and we just don't have the money for everything. So it's a frustrating process. It's a real scramble. As you probably know, 694 amendments were filed to the budget. So a lot of the process that we go through in the 2.5 days that we debate the budget has to do with looking at the amendments and, sort of a scramble to see what can we do in addition to what the basic budget has. Each one of those amendments used to sort of be discussed in its own merits, and the budget process would literally go on, from what I hear, for days and possibly even weeks. Now it's really been shortened down. So most of those amendments simply go down on what's called a voice vote, which means that there really isn't ever any debate on it. And then the more important ones, they are debated on the floor, some of the big ones, as you know. So it's a fast process. Sometimes it goes on with dizzying speed. A lot of time these amendments, by the time they actually come up for a vote, they're amended or a further amendment is added onto them. And I think a lot of times legislators are voting without exactly being sure whether they're voting on the First Amendment or a redraft or a further amendment, but because it just goes so fast.
Wolf updated us on where the budget is on Beacon Hill at this time.
The Senate budget is complete, and it's in the process of being printed, and the House one, as you know, was done several weeks ago. So what happens now is those budgets go to the conference committee, which then takes a look at both the Senate and the House budget. Those amendments or those parts of the budget that are identical in the House and the Senate are not what's called conferenceable, which means that they automatically are done. So I'll give you an example. One of the amendments that went through the House side and the Senate side, which is certainly important to the Mid-Cape, was an amendment that would allow for the Yarmouth Marina at Parker's River to move forward potentially. And because the language in the House and the Senate is the same, that's not a conferenceable amendment. So it will go through, and if the governor signs it, that'll become law. So what happens now is the non-conferenceable amendments will just sail through, but all of those amendments that are either unique to the House or the Senate, or where there are amendments that tackle the same issue but are not worded exactly the same, all of those have to be gone over in the conference committee. And then a joint budget will go to the governor. He then has line item veto authority, so he can look at it and still further modify the budget. And then we will get it for passage probably sometime, I would guess, in July.
He mentioned several key items of interest and importance, especially to those of us here in the town of Barnstable.
Everyone is focused on education, as we should be, because that affects our town budget so much. And because the education numbers were not the same in the House and the Senate, that will be conferenceable. That's the Chapter 7 money that comes through. Other support to local towns, I think the Senate budget was a little more generous than the House budget, so that'll be worked out in conference as well. The money to Mass Office of Travel and Tourism and to the Mass Cultural Council Both of those, a lot of that money goes through to our regional tourism council's Chamber of Commerce primarily. That is also a comparable amount, and I'm optimistic that we're going to do as good or better than last year. So, and then a lot of the environmental issues. For example, the Senate budget has in it $350,000 to continue looking at and hopefully planning for, in concert with each individual town, a unified regional wastewater plan. That isn't in the House budget, so that's completely conferenceable, and hopefully that will survive in the conference. So, yeah, and everything from economy, arts and culture, tourism, education, environment, everything is going to be pretty much conferenceable. So, folks should keep their eye on it and keep talking to me and the folks over on the House side that represent this district, because through the conference committee, the legislators continue to have a dialogue with those who are serving on it and Ways and Means. So the process is certainly by no means over.
Senator Wolf told us what it was like to be involved in the budget process for the second time around.
First of all, personally, I didn't really know what I was getting into last year. I have a much better sense of how to work with folks in the region here to come up with amendments, and we did that with quite a few environmental, social and human service agencies. So we did file more amendments ourselves this year, and really have worked hard to get them through this process. So I have a much better understanding of how it works. Plus, I have relationships now up there with the folks on the Ways and Means Committee and other legislators, which just makes me a much more effective legislator this time around as far as advocating for parts of the budget that will have a positive impact on the region. As I said when we started, Sarah, we're still incredibly fiscally constrained. When you look at the mandate that we have and what people expect out of us, and again, everything from economic development to education to infrastructure investments to investing in our economy, we just don't have it. We keep trying to make government more efficient, and we need to do that. And certainly speaking as a business person, I understand that any dollar we save is dollars that we can invest in really important programs and issue areas. But we still just don't have enough revenue. As you and I have discussed, we've cut higher education support in Massachusetts by 42% over the last 10 years. And if we expect to remain as a leader of all the states around the country in education, which translates into a smart and healthy workforce, we have to really examine whether that kind of cut is sustainable relative to what our goals are. So, hopefully going forward, now that I understand these issues, I can be an advocate for putting more money back into education, back into workforce development, back into environmental protection where we need it. The other daunting reality, Sarah, is that we are not getting support from the federal government anywhere close to what we used to get. And, when I say used to, I'm going back 20, 30 years. There was a time the federal government would pay for up to 90% of the wastewater remediation that we're talking about here on the Cape. So if you look at Key West, for example, when the Keys did their wastewater project, their big wastewater project several decades ago, I believe 80 to 90% of that was paid for by the federal government through the Clean Water Act. None of that money is available now. So when we talk on the Cape about spending $2 to $4 billion over the next 20 years, imagine the conversation if we knew that 80 to 90% of that money would be coming from the federal government, which is not the case. So there are a lot of challenges. Again, I don't mean to sound negative because I'm not. I'm very optimistic, and I think there's good solutions, and I'm positive about this budget. It's better than last year.
In Barnstable, Town Council will begin debates on the town's operating budget next week. Acting Town Manager Tom Lynch and Director of Finance Mark Milne presented a $156 million operating budget to Town Council last week. Town Council meets next on June 7th. Budget hearings will begin at that time. With Barnstable Today, I'm Sarah Colvin.